Send me a real warrior." The captain slammed his fist on the table. "Not some girl carrying a rifle case like she's going to a photography class." The room froze. Every soldier turned toward the door. Lieutenant Evelyn Carter stood there, said nothing, just looked at him. And in that silence, something shifted. If you're new here, subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Then drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The helicopter hit the ground hard. Not a landing, a controlled crash. The pilot was pushing the machine past its limits because the alternative was getting shot out of the sky, and everyone on board knew it. The rotors screamed, the airframe shuddered, and then the doors blew open, and the desert heat punched through like a fist. Captain Marcus Hale was already standing 30 feet away watching. He had been awake for 22 hours. His unit had been pinned inside a remote valley in Kandahar province for nearly 6 of those hours. 3 of his men were wounded. 1 was critical. Their communications relay had taken a hit from an RPG 40 minutes after the first attack wave, which meant no air support coordination, no clean satellite uplink, and no reliable way to call in the reinforcements that were supposedly coming. Supposedly. He had stopped trusting supposedly about 4 hours ago. What he needed right now was a miracle, or the closest thing the military could manufacture to one. Headquarters had promised him a specialist, someone with a particular skill set, someone whose file carried the kind of classification markings that meant you didn't ask follow-up questions, you just said yes sir and got out of the way. Ghost 7. The message had read, ETA 40 minutes, make room. Hale had passed that message to his senior NCO Sergeant, First Class Dylan Cross, who had passed it to the rest of the men, and the effect had been almost immediate. Shoulders pulled back, jaws tightened. Men who had been slumping against equipment walls sat up straight. Ghost 7 was coming. Nobody knew exactly who Ghost 7 was. That was the point of a call sign. But the classification level on that file was high enough that even Cross, who had 12 years of special operations experience and knew most of the legends in the community by first name, had gone quiet when he saw it. Must be one of the guys from the old Tier 1 selection, Cross had said. The ones they don't talk about publicly. That was enough. When you're pinned down and bleeding and the walls are closing in, the human brain will build a hero out of whatever material it has available. And by the time that helicopter touched down, the men of Hale's unit had constructed an entire mythology around Ghost 7. He would be massive, combat-hardened. The kind of man whose presence alone shifted the psychological weight of a room. He would walk off that helicopter and the enemy would somehow feel it. That's what they told themselves. That's what they needed to believe. So when the helicopter door slid open and Lieutenant Evelyn Carter stepped out onto the hot Afghan soil, the silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was confused. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall. She moved without urgency. She was carrying a single rifle case, matte black regulation issue. Nothing dramatic about it. She wasn't wearing heavy body armor. She had standard issue protection, a sidearm on her hip, and a small tactical bag over one shoulder. She looked like someone who had just arrived for a briefing, not like someone who had just fast-roped into a combat zone. Cross spoke first. He didn't mean to say it out loud. It just came out. That's who they sent us. The soldier next to him, Specialist Ramos, let out a short laugh. Not mean-spirited, just surprised. Ghost 7 is a woman. Private Kellner, 20 years old, 6 months into his first deployment, said exactly what most of the men were thinking, but shouldn't have said. They asked for a real warrior, and they sent a girl with a rifle case. It moved through the group fast. Not laughter exactly. More like the collective exhaling of a room full of men whose expectations had just been vaporized. Some looked at each other. Some looked at their boots. A few actually smiled. Carter heard it. Every word. She didn't stop walking. She didn't look at the men who were talking. She came straight toward Captain Hale, looked him in the eye, and extended her hand. "Lieutenant Evelyn Carter, sir," Ghost 7, I understand you've been pinned for 6 hours. Hale shook her hand. He was trying to hide the doubt on his face. He wasn't entirely successful. That's correct. I'll need your raw radio recordings. Everything captured from the first contact to right now. Hale blinked. Radio recordings. Yes, sir? We don't have time for... That's exactly why I need them immediately. She didn't say it sharply. She didn't raise her voice. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of calm that belongs to someone who has been in worse situations than this one and walked out the other side. Hale looked at Cross. Cross looked at Carter. Nobody moved for about 3 seconds. Then Carter said quietly, "Captain, the recordings. Please." Hale nodded at Cross. Cross went to get the recordings. The operations corner of the outpost was crowded. Maps on every surface. Tactical tablets showing drone feeds, though the drone coverage had gaps because the terrain was playing havoc with the signal. 3 junior officers hovered near Hale like they were waiting for permission to breathe. Carter set her rifle case down against the wall. Didn't open it. Didn't touch it again. She sat down at the communication station, put on a headset, and started listening. Just listening. Cross watched her from across the room. His arms were crossed. He wasn't trying to hide his skepticism anymore. He had fought in 3 combat theaters. He had served alongside some of the best operators in the military. He had a particular way of measuring people, and that measurement happened in the first few minutes, and right now his internal calculation was coming back with a number he didn't like. "She's listening to radio chatter," he said to Ramos, keeping his voice low. "We've got men taking fire, and she's listening to radio chatter." "Maybe that's what specialists do," Ramos offered. "Specialists act," Cross said. "That's why they're called in." He wasn't wrong from a conventional standpoint. When a situation was deteriorating, you moved. You responded. You applied force and pressure, and you didn't sit down and put on headphones like you were studying for a test. Cross had been trained his entire career to operate on that principle. Carter had been trained on a different one. She sat there for 18 minutes. Not 17. Not 20. 18. The men in the room became increasingly restless. The sounds of the distant firefight, sporadic now but constant, were a reminder that time was something they didn't have in abundance. Hale checked his watch twice. He caught himself before he checked a third time. One of the junior officers, Lieutenant Briggs, finally broke. "Ma'am, with respect, our heavy weapons position has been compromised, and we need to..." Carter held up one finger. Just one finger. Briggs stopped talking. The room stared at her. She kept listening. And then, at exactly the 18-minute mark, she took off the headset and set it down on the table, with the deliberate care of someone who had just finished reading the last page of a very important document. She turned around. "They're not attacking you," she said. The room reacted immediately. "Not attacking us," Cross said. "We've got 3 men wounded." "They're controlling you," Carter said. "There's a difference." She stood up and moved to the tactical map on the wall. "Listen to the recording timestamps. Every 4 minutes and 12 seconds a different position fires. Not to advance, not to destroy, to occupy, to keep your attention fixed in one direction." Hale stepped forward, looking at the map. "We've been watching those positions all day," he said. "I know," Carter said. "And while you were watching them, you weren't watching something else." She pointed to an area on the map. A ridge. Not the ridge where the enemy positions were marked. A different one. Further back. Elevated. "There's an observer up there," she said. "Not a fighter, a coordinator, someone with line of sight to the entire valley, who's been timing every movement, every communication, every decision you've made since first contact." The room went still. Not the quiet of people who were skeptical. The quiet of people who were starting to realize they might have missed something enormous. Cross uncrossed his arms. Hale leaned in closer to the map. "Our drone coverage on that ridge came back clean," Hale said. "When was the last pass?" 2 hours ago." Carter looked at him. 2 hours ago, that observer wasn't in position yet. Or they were, and the positioning was too disciplined for the drone optics to flag. She paused. They knew your drone schedule. That landed like a stone, dropping into still water. The ripples moved through the room fast. Eyes moved. Jaws tightened. The junior officers exchanged glances that said the same thing without words. They knew our drone schedule. If that was true, if someone on that ridge had been watching them long enough to map their surveillance patterns, then everything that had happened in the last 6 hours had been orchestrated. Not a battle, a controlled dismantling. How do you know this? Briggs asked. He wasn't being hostile. He genuinely wanted to understand. Because I've seen it before, Carter said simply. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Cross's voice when he finally spoke was quieter than anyone had heard it all day. Where exactly on that ridge? Carter pointed to a specific grid coordinate. There's a natural blind about 60 meters below the crest. Good concealment. Perfect sightlines down the valley. Protected from your current drone angles. Hale studied the map. And you think one person at that coordinate is controlling this whole thing? Yes. Without that person... Carter let the question hang for a moment. Then she answered it plainly. Without that person, what they have is a group of fighters who no longer know what to do next. Hale looked at Cross. Cross looked at Carter. What do you need? Hale said. The old observation tower, Carter said. The room erupted, not loudly. These were trained soldiers, but the resistance was immediate and visible. Cross spoke first. That tower has been out of rotation for 8 months. It's structurally compromised, and it's completely exposed to the eastern approach. I know, Carter said. If you go up there, every position they have in the valley will have a clean shot at you. I know that too. Then why? Because they won't expect anyone to go there, Carter said. The tower is exposed. No rational military actor climbs an exposed position during an active firefight, which is exactly why they haven't covered it. She picked up her rifle case. They've been watching your decisions for 6 hours. Every move you've made has followed doctrine. The tower doesn't follow doctrine. She looked at Hale. That's why I need it. Hale didn't answer immediately. He was doing the math that every commander has to do. The math that weighs risk against probability and outcome against cost, and asks the central question, what happens if I say no? If he said no, they held their position and waited for reinforcements that might or might not arrive before the enemy tightened the noose. If he said yes, he sent a single lieutenant up an unstable exposed tower in the middle of an active engagement with nothing but a rifle case and a theory. You understand what you're asking me to authorize, Hale said. Yes, sir. If you're wrong about that ridge, then I'm wrong, Carter said, and you're in the same position you're in right now. Silence. Then Cross said something nobody expected. She's not wrong about the timing pattern. Every head turned. Cross had his arms at his sides now. I went back through the contact log in my head while she was talking, he said. 4 minutes. Every time. I didn't notice it because I was in it. But she's right. He looked at Carter. She looked back at him. He nodded. It wasn't an apology. It was something more honest than that. Hale turned to Carter. Go, he said. She was already moving. The staircase inside the observation tower groaned under her weight. Not from structural weakness, from age, from 8 months of sitting empty in the desert heat, bolts expanding and contracting with the temperature swings, wood warping, metal settling. Carter took each step with controlled weight distribution. Not because she was afraid of the tower, because noise was information and she didn't want to give any away. She had her rifle case in her left hand. Her right hand stayed free. 3 flights up she stopped. Not because she heard something, because she felt something. Years of pattern recognition had wired into her nervous system the way instinct wires into an animal. It wasn't mystical. It wasn't supernatural. It was repetition, compounded over time, until the conscious brain stopped being involved in certain calculations. She stood completely still for 4 seconds. Then she moved again. The top of the tower was open on 3 sides. Good for observation, terrible for cover. The floor had gaps where boards had warped apart. The railing was gone on the northern side. Carter didn't go to the northern side. She went to the eastern edge, kept herself below the sight line of the gaps in the railing on that side, and lowered herself to one knee. Below, the valley spread out in every direction. She could see the enemy positions that had been pinning the unit all day. From up here, the coordinated geometry of the attack was immediately obvious. The positions were arranged not to converge on the American outpost, but to form a perimeter, a containment structure. She had been right. This wasn't an assault. It was a cage. She opened her rifle case. The weapon inside was not standard issue. It was configured to her specifications, built around a .50 caliber platform, but modified in ways that the technical manual didn't cover, because the technical manual was written for general use cases, and Carter had never been a general use case. She assembled it without looking at her hands. Her eyes were already on the ridge. The natural blind she had identified from the map was there. She could see it. Or rather, she could see what wasn't there, the subtle geometry of a position that had been chosen specifically because it blended. Most people scan a landscape for things that stand out. Carter scanned for things that were trying too hard not to. And there it was, a slight asymmetry in the shadow pattern on the lower face of the ridge. The kind of thing that happened when a human body occupied a space designed for concealment and wasn't quite as still as they thought they were being. She adjusted her position, controlled her breathing. Not slow, controlled. There's a difference. Below, she could hear the radio traffic from the outpost. Hale was holding the unit together. Cross was coordinating suppression fire to keep the enemy positions occupied and their attention down. Nobody was looking at the ridge. Nobody except Carter. She found the observer in her scope. For a moment, just a moment, she thought about what she was looking at. A human being who was very good at their job, who had studied this valley, mapped this unit, built a strategy out of patience and precision, who had turned 6 hours of combat into a masterclass in psychological attrition. Carter respected that. It didn't change anything. She exhaled. Halfway through the breath, she stopped. In that suspended half-second between exhale and inhale, the world became very still. One shot, and everything below shifted. The radio traffic on the enemy frequency, which she had running through an earpiece, went from controlled to fractured in less than 15 seconds. Voices overlapping, questions without answers, positions asking the coordinator for direction and getting nothing back. Getting nothing back because the coordinator was gone. Carter shifted her scope. The eastern machine gun position. The one that had been suppressing the American heavy weapons team all afternoon. She could see the gunner. She could see his movement patterns. She waited. Second shot. The position went quiet. Then the northern position. Third shot. Then the communication relay point she had identified based on where the radio traffic was thickest. Fourth shot. By the fourth shot, the sounds from below had changed completely. Not just on the enemy frequency. Down in the valley, the American soldiers had heard what was happening and were reacting. She could hear Cross on the command channel, his voice tight with controlled shock. What is happening to their positions? Are they taking fire from? Where is this coming from? And then Hale's voice quieter. It's coming from the tower. A pause. It's coming from Carter. Another pause. Don't interfere. Let her work. Carter let her work. By the time she had fired her 8th round, the coordinated enemy attack that had imprisoned a full special operations unit for 6 hours had disintegrated into confusion. Fighters who had been executing a disciplined strategy were now making individual decisions, and individual decisions in a firefight meant predictable decisions, and predictable decisions were the easiest kind to counter. She heard Cross on the channel again. His voice was different now. The skepticism was gone. What was there instead was harder to name. Something between awe and the specific humility that comes from being very wrong about something that mattered. She's taking apart their entire command structure, Cross said. Shot by shot. Down below, the American unit began to move, not retreat, advance, into the gaps that Carter was creating with each shot. Regaining ground they had lost 6 hours ago, reclaiming positions they had abandoned under fire. The battle didn't end dramatically. It unwound, like a knot being pulled loose one strand at a time. And at the top of the broken tower, in a position no rational military actor would have climbed, Lieutenant Evelyn Carter kept working. Methodical, patient, completely alone, and completely in control. When the last significant enemy position went dark, she sat back on her heels and breathed out slow. The valley was not silent. There was still sporadic fire. There would be cleanup. There would be hours of securing and confirming and coordinating. But the thing that had been broken for 6 hours was fixed now. The cage was open. She began disassembling her weapon with the same deliberate care she had used to assemble it. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was not something she had been born with. It was something she had earned in rooms like this one on hills, like this one in moments where the entire weight of a situation sat on the edge of a single decision, and the only thing that held it in place was discipline. She closed the rifle case. She stood up. She looked out at the valley one more time, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, with the particular attention of someone who was already asking the next question. What did I miss? What didn't I see? What would the next one look like? Because the hill was won, that was real. But the war was long, and the lessons it taught were expensive, and Evelyn Carter had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous moment for any soldier was the one right after they believed they had figured something out. She picked up her rifle case. She started down the stairs. Behind her, the valley settled into the particular kind of quiet that only comes after something very loud has finally stopped. Below, Sergeant Dylan Cross was staring up at the tower. He had been staring for several minutes. He was trying to find the word for what he had just watched. He couldn't find it. Some things don't have words yet. They just have the feeling of standing in a valley at dusk, watching a woman you dismissed walk back down a tower you said was too dangerous, carrying a rifle case that just rewrote your understanding of what a warrior is supposed to look like. Cross turned to Ramos. Ramos was still staring at the tower too. Neither of them said anything for a long time. There was nothing to say. The battle had said it for them. Cross was the first one to reach her when she came down, not because he was closest, because he moved before anyone else did. He pushed through the cluster of soldiers standing near the base of the tower and got there just as Carter's boots hit the ground, rifle case in her left hand, tactical bag still on her right shoulder, same as when she'd arrived. She looked exactly the same as when she'd gone up. That bothered him more than he expected. He had just watched her dismantle 6 hours of coordinated enemy strategy in under 11 minutes. He had watched through binoculars as position after position went dark. He had heard the enemy radio traffic collapse from disciplined command structure into shouting, then into silence. He had seen his own men who had been frozen in defensive crouch for most of the afternoon, suddenly stand up and move forward because the pressure holding them down had evaporated. All of that had come from the woman who was now standing in front of him, looking like she had just stepped out of a routine training exercise. Cross opened his mouth, then closed it, then tried again. "How many rounds?" he said. Carter looked at him. 8. Cross stared at her. 8 rounds. Yes. To neutralize, 8 rounds, she said again, not to cut him off. Just because the number was the number and repeating it didn't change it. Cross turned around. He looked at Ramos. Ramos was still holding his binoculars like he'd forgotten they were in his hands. Kellner, the private who had made the joke when she stepped off the helicopter, was standing about 10 feet back, and the expression on his face was the specific kind of stunned that only comes when reality has just run directly over the thing you believe to be true. Cross turned back to Carter. He had a lot of questions. He would eventually get to all of them. But right now there was only one that mattered. "How did you see the observer?" he said. "Our drone runs came back clean on that ridge." Carter set her rifle case down. When did you run the last drone pass on the eastern ridge? 1400 hours, 2 hours before you arrived. And your drone flight pattern? How long has it been the same? Cross went very still. It was the stillness of a man doing rapid mental arithmetic and not liking the answer he was getting. We rotated the pattern every 4 days, he said slowly. And you've been at this outpost for how long? Cross didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence answered for him. Carter picked up her rifle case. They mapped your surveillance schedule, she said. Which means they weren't just watching this valley. They were studying you, your rhythms, your patterns, your predictability. She said the last word without judgment. That was the part that landed hardest. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact delivered the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, not to assign blame, but because the truth is the only useful starting point. Cross exhaled through his nose. How long have they been watching us? Based on the coordination level I heard in those recordings, Carter said. At least 3 weeks. The number moved through the group of soldiers standing within earshot like a current. 3 weeks. Every patrol route, every supply rotation, every shift change, every predictable human behavior that a disciplined enemy with patience and a good observer could catalog and weaponize. Cross looked at Hale, who had just walked up from the command post. Hale had heard the last part of the conversation. His face showed nothing because he was very good at showing nothing. But Cross had served alongside Hale for 2 years and could read the muscles around his jaw the way other people read text. Hale was furious, not at Carter, at himself. 3 weeks, Hale said. Possibly longer, Carter said. The attack today was too clean for something planned in less time than that. The position selection, the timing sequence, the choice to attrite rather than assault, that's not improvised. Someone spent weeks watching this unit specifically to understand where the breaking point was. And where was it? Hale said. Carter looked at him directly. 6 hours, she said. That's when they calculated your ammunition reserves would drop to the threshold where suppression fire becomes unsustainable. That's when they planned to advance. Hale absorbed that. We had about 40 minutes left before that threshold, he said. I know, Carter said. That particular exchange did something to the air in the group. Not panic, not despair. Something quieter and more corrosive. The realization that they had been not just outmaneuvered, but precisely measured, that an enemy had sat on a ridge and calculated the exact moment when the American unit would be most vulnerable, was the kind of knowledge that got under a soldier's skin in ways that enemy fire never quite could. Because bullets you could see coming. This you couldn't. Captain Hale pulled Carter into the operations space for a full debrief 20 minutes later. Cross was there. So were Briggs and 2 other officers whose names Carter had noted but hadn't yet attached to full assessments of competence. She was doing that, constantly building pictures of the people around her, measuring response times, noting who asked useful questions and who asked questions to demonstrate they were asking questions. Hale spread the tactical map on the table. Walk me through what you heard in those recordings, he said. Carter didn't sit down. She stood at the map. The first thing I heard was the silence between transmissions, she said. Briggs frowned. The silence. Enemy communications are usually the loudest thing in a contact recording, Carter said. They're coordinating, reacting, reporting, but in your recordings the enemy transmissions were short, minimal, almost scripted. She tapped the map. That tells you something important. When fighters in contact keep their communications short and scripted, it means they already know what to do, which means someone already told them, which means the operational decisions weren't being made during the fight. She looked up at the group. They were made before it started. Cross leaned forward on the table. A pre-planned engagement, he said. Not a reaction to our position. A rehearsed one, Carter said. The timing interval's 4 minutes and 12 seconds between position firings. That's not natural combat rhythm. That's a drill sequence. Someone ran these fighters through this exact scenario before they executed it, which means somewhere there's a planning cell that designed this specific engagement for this specific unit. Hale's jaw moved slightly. You're telling me this wasn't opportunistic? No, Carter said. This was a commissioned attack. Someone identified your unit, analyzed your vulnerabilities, designed a containment strategy around those specific vulnerabilities, and then deployed fighters to execute it with enough rehearsal time that their radio discipline stayed clean under fire. The room was absolutely quiet. Hale looked at the map for a long moment. Then he looked at Carter. Is the threat neutralized? Carter said nothing for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Cross watched her face. He had started watching her face the way he watched terrain for information, not aesthetics. And what he saw there was not reassurance. The immediate threat is neutralized, she said. The planning cell isn't. Briggs straightened. You think they'll try again? I think if the planning cell is still intact, and they've already invested 3+ weeks in studying this unit, they will absolutely try again, Carter said, with a modified approach based on what didn't work today. Then we need to find the cell, Hale said. Yes, Carter said. How? The observer I neutralized on the ridge was the communication link between the planning cell and the field fighters. That position was chosen for a reason. The sight lines, the protection, the specific grid coordinate. She paused. I need to go back to the recordings. But this time, I need everything. Every recorded transmission from the past 3 weeks, not just today. Hale looked at Cross. Cross looked at Carter. That's a significant amount of data, Cross said. I'm aware, Carter said. It'll take time to compile and decrypt. I know that too. We might not have Sergeant Cross, Carter said. He stopped. You've been telling me what we don't have since I landed, she said. Still calm, no edge in it, but direct in the way that leaves no room for anything except the truth. I understand the constraints. I'm working within them. What I need from you right now is not a list of obstacles. I need you to get me those recordings. Cross held her gaze for a full 3 seconds. Then he nodded once and left to get the recordings. What happened in the next 4 hours changed something permanent in the way the unit understood the situation they were in. Carter worked through the recordings systematically. She wasn't transcribing. She wasn't logging. She was listening the way a musician listens to a recording of a performance, not for the notes, but for the structure underneath the notes. The decisions, the hesitations, the places where the rhythm changed and told you something about what the performer was actually thinking. Cross came back twice with additional data sets. The first time he set them down without saying anything. The second time he pulled a chair to the edge of the table she was working at and sat down. He didn't speak. He watched her work. After about 15 minutes of that, Carter spoke without looking up. You're trying to figure out what I'm doing. Yes, Cross said. Ask. Are you pattern matching, running some kind of analysis protocol? Carter finally looked up at him. I'm listening for what doesn't fit, she said. Cross waited. Every intelligence pattern has a fingerprint, she said. The way someone plans reveals how they think. The decisions they make reveal what they value. And the mistakes they make, even very small ones, reveal what they're afraid of. You can hear all that in radio recordings. You can hear it anywhere, Carter said. If you know what to listen for. Cross was quiet for a moment. How long did it take you to know what to listen for? Carter looked at him. How long have you been in the Army? 12 years. And when did you stop thinking about how to move through a building and just move? Cross understood. He didn't say anything. He sat with it. After a moment, what have you found? Carter set down the headset. 2 things, she said. First, there's a second planning cell, not the same one that designed today's engagement. A different one operating independently. I can hear it in the frequency patterns. Different operators, different communication discipline, different scripting style. Cross leaned forward. A second cell. Operating about 12 kilometers northeast, Carter said, based on signal propagation and the terrain data from your maps. What's their target? Carter looked at him. "I don't know yet," she said, "but they're not watching this outpost." Cross processed that. "Then who?" "The resupply convoy," Carter said. "The one scheduled for tomorrow morning." The words hit Cross like a change in air pressure. The resupply convoy. 42 personnel. Medical supplies. Ammunition. A rolling asset that had been scheduled on a fixed route for the past 2 months. A fixed route. Cross was out of his chair before Carter finished the sentence. "Hale!" he called across the operations room. Hale looked up from the communications terminal. "We've got a problem with tomorrow's convoy." The next 20 minutes were the controlled kind of chaos that a well-trained unit produces when it has to change direction fast. Hale was on the secure line to headquarters within 4 minutes of Cross's warning. Carter was pulled into the call because Hale didn't want to describe what she'd found. Secondhand, he wanted the source speaking directly. The headquarters duty officer was a colonel named Brentwood, who had 12 years in signals intelligence and did not appreciate being told that his convoy route had been compromised by a lieutenant he'd never heard of, based on pattern analysis of enemy radio recordings. "Walk me through your methodology," Brentwood said. Carter walked him through it. Clinical, precise, without condescension and without apology. When she finished, there was a pause on the line. Then Brentwood said, "How confident are you?" "Confident enough to tell you," Carter said. Another pause. "That's not a percentage." "No," Carter said. "It isn't, because I'm not going to give you a false precision to make you more comfortable with a decision you have to make anyway." Cross, standing next to Hale, felt something shift in the room. He had heard a lot of people talk to senior officers. He had never heard anyone talk to a senior officer quite like that. Brentwood was quiet for 4 seconds. "The convoy route gets rerouted," he said finally. "I want your full analysis on my desk in 2 hours." The line went dead. Hale looked at Carter. "You just told a colonel that his comfort wasn't your problem." "I told him the truth was more useful than a number I made up," Carter said. He agreed. Cross turned away before Hale could see him almost smile. The 2 hours after that call were the first time Carter ate anything since she'd landed. Cross brought her a field ration without being asked. He set it on the table next to her recording equipment and didn't say anything about it. She ate without stopping her work. He noticed she ate the same way she did everything else efficiently, without waste, without particular enjoyment, but without complaint either. He had been cataloging her the way she cataloged everything. It was a professional habit. And what he had cataloged so far was a person who had somehow eliminated from her operating system every behavior that didn't serve a direct function. No performance, no posturing, no wasted motion, just the work. "Can I ask you something?" Cross said. "You've been asking me things since I landed," Carter said. A different kind of question. She looked up. "When you went up that tower," Cross said, "were you scared?" Carter was quiet for a moment. Not in the way of someone deciding whether to answer. In the way of someone who doesn't get asked that question very often and is locating an honest response. "I was aware of the risk," she said. "That's not what I asked." "No," she said. "It isn't." Another pause. "Yes, in the way that you're always aware something could go wrong. But fear is a paralytic no. I've spent a long time making sure that the part of my brain that processes fear doesn't get to vote on decisions." Cross nodded slowly. "How do you do that?" Carter looked at him directly. "You replace the question," she said. "Most people ask, what if something goes wrong? I ask, what is the cost of not acting? When the cost of not acting is high enough, the other question becomes irrelevant." Cross sat with that. Outside, the sporadic sounds of the valley had settled further. The cleanup was ongoing. His men were doing what they were trained to do. "When I saw you step off that helicopter," Cross said, "I said something I shouldn't have said." Carter didn't respond immediately. "I heard it," she said. "I know you heard it." She set down the headset. She looked at him. Not with anger, Not with forgiveness either exactly. With something more direct than either of those. "I'm not interested in an apology, Sergeant Cross," she said. "Apologies are retrospective. What I'm interested in is whether you're going to make the same mistake with the next person who doesn't look like what you expect." Cross held her gaze. "I won't," he said. "Good," she said. She picked up the headset. "Then we're past it." Cross stood up. He felt something he didn't have a precise name for. Not shame. He'd already moved through that. Something more like the aftermath of shame, the cleared space it leaves when it burns off. A space where a different understanding could grow. He had spent 12 years building a very specific picture of what effective looked like, what dangerous looked like, what the kind of soldier who changed a battlefield looked like. He had been wrong. Not in a way that was comfortable to hold, but in a way that was useful. That distinction mattered to him. Cross was many things, but he was not a man who let discomfort become an excuse for not changing. He moved back to his station. It was close to midnight when Carter found it. The room had thinned out. Briggs had gone to check on the perimeter. 2 of the junior officers were running on 2 hours of sleep each and fighting it. Hale was at the communications terminal running through the updated security protocols they were implementing based on Carter's assessment of their surveillance vulnerabilities. Cross was still there. He had told himself he was staying to monitor the overnight security rotation. That was partially true. Carter's voice cut through the room. "Hale." Not Captain, not Sir, just Hale. Hale turned around immediately. Cross turned around too. Carter had both headsets on. She was holding up one hand, the universal signal for complete silence, and her eyes were fixed on some middle distance that had nothing to do with the physical space she was in. She was listening to something. Everyone in the room understood this without being told. Hale crossed the room, stood next to her, waited, 30 seconds, 45. Carter took off both headsets. Her face had changed. Not dramatically. She wasn't a person whose face changed dramatically. But Cross had been studying her for hours now, and he could read the subtle tightening around her eyes that meant the calculation in her head had just produced a number nobody was going to like. "The second cell isn't after the convoy," she said. Hale went very still. "I misread the target," she said. "It came out flat and direct. No hedging, no softening. The same way she delivered everything. The convoy was the distraction. The real target is the forward command post at grid reference." She checked her notes. Hotel 4. It's the regional communications hub. Hale's face did something complicated. Hotel 4 was not just a communications hub. Hotel 4 was the relay point for 12 separate special operations units operating across the province. If Hotel 4 went dark even temporarily, it didn't just cut communications. It effectively blinded 12 units simultaneously. It was the most consequential single target in the province. "Time to strike," Hale said. "Based on the operational tempo in the recordings," Carter said, "between 0400 and 0500. 4 hours. Cross looked at the clock on the wall, looked back at Carter. "How confident," he started. Carter looked at him. He stopped. "Right." They'd had that conversation. "Who do we call?" Cross said instead. "Hotel 4's Security Command," Hale said. He was already moving toward the communications terminal. "And we need to get Colonel Brentwood back on the line. He's going to ask about methodology again," Cross said. Hale looked at Carter. Carter was already putting the headsets back on. "Tell him," she said, "that I was wrong about the convoy and right about everything else, and that I need him to trust the everything else." Hale picked up the handset. Cross stood in the middle of the room watching Carter go back to work and understood that he was in the presence of something he had never encountered before and might not encounter again. Not just skill, not just intelligence, something harder to name and harder to acquire. The specific, rare, almost brutal clarity of a person who had spent years stripping away everything that wasn't signal until what was left was pure. He thought about the joke Private Kellner had made when she stepped off the helicopter. He thought about his own words. "That's who they sent us." He would spend a long time thinking about those words, not with guilt, That wasn't useful. With the particular attention of someone who had learned something at considerable cost and intended to keep it. The room hummed around him. Hale's voice on the secure line, tight and precise. Carter's hands moving over the equipment headsets on eyes somewhere far away from this room and deep inside the invisible architecture of the enemy's plan. 4 hours until 0400. 4 hours, and somewhere 12 kilometers northeast, a second planning cell was finalizing the details of an attack that would have been invisible to everyone except the woman they had all laughed at 9 hours ago when she walked off a helicopter carrying a rifle case. Cross moved to his station. He had work to do. They all did. The call to Colonel Brentwood lasted 9 minutes. Hale did most of the talking. Carter sat 3 feet away. Headsets still on, still working the recordings, and listened to one side of a conversation that would determine whether 12 special operations units lived or died in the next 4 hours. Brentwood's first response was silence. Not the silence of consideration. The silence of a man whose entire afternoon had already been reconstructed by someone he'd never heard of, and who was now being told that the reconstruction wasn't finished. She was wrong about the convoy, Brentwood said finally. She corrected herself before we acted on it, Hale said. The convoy reroute hasn't executed yet. She told me she was confident. She told you she was confident enough to tell you, Hale said. That's not the same thing. And she's telling you now that she misread one layer and found 2 underneath it. Another silence. Hale looked at Carter. Carter was still working. She wasn't tracking the call. She trusted Hale to handle it. That trust was not passive, it was calculated. She had assessed Hale in the first 20 minutes after landing and determined that he was the kind of commander who could carry information accurately under pressure without editorializing it into something safer or more comfortable. She had been right about that. "What's her confidence level on Hotel 4?" Brentwood asked. Hale looked at Carter. Carter had heard the question through the ambient sound in the room. She pulled one headset cup away from her ear without turning around. "Tell him I wouldn't be making this call at midnight if I wasn't sure," she said. Hale repeated it word for word. Brentwood was quiet for 5 seconds. "Get Hotel 4's security command on the line," he said. "3-way. Now." The 3-way call added a Major Delacroix to the conversation, Hotel 4's head of security, a woman with 20 years in Army intelligence who had heard a lot of threat briefings in her career and had the voice of someone who had stopped being surprised by most things a long time ago. She listened to Carter's assessment without interruption. When Carter finished, Delacroix said, "Walk me through the signal pattern that told you the target had shifted." Carter walked her through it. Delacroix asked 2 follow-up questions, precise ones, the kind that came from someone who already understood the methodology and was checking for gaps, not asking for explanation. Carter answered both. Then Delacroix said something that nobody in Hale's operations room expected. "I know who designed this attack." The room temperature seemed to drop. Hale leaned toward the handset. "Say again." "The scripting style. The dual cell structure with one acting as decoy. The timing sequence built around a pre-mapped surveillance pattern." Delacroix's voice was completely controlled. "We've seen this before. 18 months ago in a different province. A different unit. Different target." Cross looked at Carter. Carter had gone completely still. "What happened to that unit?" Hale asked. A pause. "They didn't have someone who caught it in time," Delacroix said. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Carter said, "The cell leader. Do you have identification?" "We have a designation," Delacroix said. "We've never had a location. He moves, changes patterns, changes personnel between operations. The only consistent signature is the structural design of the attacks." "Which I just heard in the recordings," Carter said. "Yes, which means he's here," Carter said. "Not 12 kilometers northeast, closer. The cell leader doesn't design remotely. He observes the first phase personally before he executes the second." Another silence. This one felt different, heavier. Cross said quietly, almost to himself. He was watching us today. He was watching everything today, Carter said. The first attack, the response, the timing of the helicopter, he saw all of it. Which means he saw you arrive, Hale said. Carter nodded. Which means he knows the observer is gone, Cross said. He knows his first cell failed. Yes, Carter said. So why is he still executing the second phase? Briggs said from across the room. He had come back at some point during the call without anyone noticing. If he saw what happened today, why doesn't he abort? Carter looked at Briggs. Because he doesn't think the second phase has been identified, she said. He built the convoy as a deliberate false flag. If we'd redirected our attention to the convoy, which is exactly what conventional analysis would have done, he'd have executed Hotel 4 cleanly while we were focused in the wrong direction. She paused. He thinks his misdirection worked. So he doesn't know you found Hotel 4, Cross said. Not yet, Carter said. Cross felt the weight of those two words. Not yet. Somewhere out there, a man who had designed two layered attacks simultaneously was still operating on the assumption that his plan was intact. He had watched his first cell dismantled from a distance, adjusted his timeline accordingly, and was now running his second phase with the confidence of someone who believed the only person capable of reading his design was busy chasing a convoy. He was wrong, and he didn't know he was wrong. That gap, the space between what he believed and what was actually true, was the only window they had, and it was closing. Delacroix's security team at Hotel 4 began implementing lockdown protocols within 6 minutes of the call ending. It wasn't enough. Carter knew that before anyone said it out loud. She knew it the way she knew things, not from pessimism, but from arithmetic. A facility-wide lockdown takes time. Repositioning security assets takes time. Changing access protocols takes time. And time was the one resource that was running out at a fixed and non-negotiable rate. She pulled up the terrain data on the tactical tablet. Cross, she said. He was at her elbow before she finished saying his name. Hotel 4's eastern approach, she said, pointing to the screen. What's the response time for the quick reaction force from this position to that grid? Cross looked at the screen. Did the math. 40 minutes minimum, he said. Road conditions at night probably closer to 50. We have 3 hours and 40 minutes to 0400, Carter said. Plenty of time. No, Carter said. It isn't. Cross stared at her. The 0400 window is when I expect the main assault element to move, Carter said. But there's a pre-positioning phase. They'll have personnel already inside or adjacent to the perimeter before that window opens. She tapped the screen. Based on the communication tempo in the last 3 hours of recordings, the pre-positioning started 40 minutes ago. Cross went rigid. They're already moving. Someone is already in position, Carter said, or close to it. Cross looked at Hale. Hale was already reaching for the handset. Delacroix, he said when the line connected. Your perimeter. Any anomalies in the last hour. Personnel vehicles, anything that didn't fit the standard pattern. He listened. His face changed. Say that again, he said. He listened again. He put down the handset and looked at Carter. An access badge was used at the eastern maintenance gate 45 minutes ago, he said. The name on the badge is a contractor who's been cleared for the facility for 8 months, but his vehicle isn't in the lot. Carter looked at Cross. Cross looked at Carter. He's already inside, Cross said. Or someone is, Carter said. She stood up. I need a secure line to Delacroix's personal radio, not the facility command net. Her personal radio. Why her personal? Because if someone is inside that facility, the command net is compromised, Carter said. Everything broadcast on it tells them exactly what the response looks like. Cross moved. He had stopped questioning her mid-sentence approximately 3 hours ago. It had happened somewhere around the 2nd hour of recordings, when she had predicted a radio transmission from a specific enemy position within a 40-second window, and been right to within 8 seconds. After that, the lag time between her speaking and him moving had compressed to almost nothing. This was what trust looked like when it was built on evidence rather than history. Hale got Delacroix on a secondary channel. Carter took the handset. "Major, I need you to do something that's going to feel wrong," she said. "I need you to not change anything about your lockdown response. No additional movement, no repositioning of guards, business as usual on your command net." Delacroix was quiet for a moment. "You want me to act like I don't know someone's inside my facility? I want whoever is inside your facility to continue believing that your response is following the script he planned for," Carter said. "The moment he sees a deviation, he accelerates. And an accelerated timeline in a facility with that many personnel." "I understand," Delacroix said. Her voice was steady, steadier than most people's would have been in that situation. "What do I do?" "Tell me your facility layout," Carter said. "Specifically where the communications relay hardware is physically located, not the room designation, the physical access points." Delacroix told her. Carter closed her eyes. Not dramatically, just the way someone closes their eyes when they're building a three-dimensional model inside their head and the visual input from the world is noise. She was mapping it, the layout, the access points, the security camera coverage, the blind spots that any competent adversary would have identified during the 8 months their asset had been walking the facility. She opened her eyes. "There are 3 possible staging positions inside that facility where someone could sit for 2 hours without being flagged by routine security movement," she said. "I need you to pull the internal camera feeds for those 3 locations. Don't move any personnel toward them. Just look. If I pull camera feeds, that activity will show on the monitoring log," Delacroix said. "Can you pull them from a terminal that's not on the command net?" A pause. "The duty officer's personal tablet. It has read access to the internal camera system." "Use that," Carter said. Silence on the line for 90 seconds. Cross was watching Carter. Carter was watching the handset. Neither of them spoke. Then Delacroix's voice came back. Quiet. Controlled. The particular control of someone who has just seen something and is choosing their words with surgical precision. "North Maintenance Corridor. Camera 3. There's a man in there who shouldn't be." The room moved. Not physically. Emotionally. The way a room moves when the thing everyone feared was real turns out to actually be real. Hale's hand went to the communications terminal. "Don't move anyone toward him yet," Carter said sharply. Hale stopped. "If he sees response movement on the cameras, and he will be watching the cameras he executes early," Carter said. "Whatever he's carrying, whatever his trigger mechanism is, he executes it." "Then what do we do?" Hale said. The frustration in his voice was real and reasonable. He was a man of action in a situation that was demanding stillness. Carter looked at him. "We figure out who he is," she said. The next 30 minutes were the longest Cross had ever experienced at a stationary position. He was a man built for movement, for response, for the direct application of force against a known problem. What Carter was asking everyone in the room to do to sit and analyze while a man with unknown capabilities sat inside a critical facility went against every trained instinct he had. But he stayed. Because she was right, and he knew she was right, and that knowledge overrode the instinct. Carter worked the contractor badge records that Delacroix fed through on the secondary channel. 8 months of access logs. Entry times. Exit times. Duration. Patterns. She found it in 14 minutes. "His access pattern has a gap," she said. "Every Wednesday for the past 6 weeks, he's been inside the facility for between 3 and 4 hours. Always the same time window, always entering through the eastern maintenance gate." "Regular access pattern," Briggs said. "What's unusual about that?" "The Wednesday window corresponds to when the weekly internal security audit runs," Carter said. "Someone told him when the audit runs because he's been using that window to move through the facility without generating anomalous log entries. The audit creates noise in the system. He hides in the noise." Cross stared at her. He's been rehearsing, Cross said. For 6 weeks. Learning the facility, Carter said. Where to move. Where the cameras don't cover. What the normal log patterns look like when he's inside. He knows that building the way I know this room right now. She looked at Hale. Which means he doesn't need to move when he executes. He's already in position. Hale absorbed that. The communications relay is on the 3rd floor, Delacroix had said. Carter pulled that back to the front of her memory. 3rd floor, northern section. Access via the maintenance corridor on the east side. The same corridor where Camera 3 had just found him. He's 15 meters from the relay hardware, Carter said. The room understood that simultaneously. 15 meters, not breaking in, already positioned, already waiting for 0400, Cross said. Can we get a team inside that corridor without triggering the cameras? Not in time, Carter said. Sniper coverage from outside. The corridor has no external window exposure on the camera angle we have, Carter said. And if we move personnel into external positions around the facility, he'll see the pattern shift on the cameras he's monitoring. So we can't move in and we can't move outside, Cross said. What does that leave? Carter was quiet, not the quiet of someone who didn't know. The quiet of someone who was examining an answer they hadn't decided yet whether to say out loud. Cross recognized it. He'd seen it before twice now. Once before she'd asked for the observation tower. Once before she'd told Hale the convoy was wrong. It was the quiet of someone preparing to say something that everyone else in the room was going to immediately resist. There's one thing he can't control, Carter said. She looked at Hale. He planned for a security response. He planned for lockdown. He planned for external perimeter adjustment. He planned for everything the facility can throw at him because he spent 6 weeks learning exactly what the facility can throw. She paused. He didn't plan for someone who was never supposed to be in the equation. Hale stared at her. No, he said. I need a vehicle and a route to Hotel 4, Carter said. Carter. He doesn't know I exist, she said. He watched today's contact from a distance. He saw his observer eliminated. He knows something changed in the valley today, but he doesn't know what. He doesn't know someone read his structure. He doesn't know anyone is tracking his second cell. As far as he knows, the only person who disrupted his first phase is sitting in an outpost 9 kilometers away, and his second phase is executing on schedule. She looked at Hale directly. I'm not in his plan, she said. That's the only asset we have that he can't counter. The room was completely silent. Cross looked at Hale. Hale looked at Carter. You'd be walking into a facility with a hostile operative of unknown capability and unknown armament, Hale said. Alone. In a corridor with no camera coverage and no backup response time. Yes, Carter said. That's what I do, Carter said quietly. Not with bravado, not with drama. With the simple, flat certainty of someone describing their professional function. This is what I do. Cross felt something move through him that he couldn't immediately classify. It wasn't admiration exactly, or it wasn't only admiration. It was the more complicated feeling of watching someone accept a risk you know is real with a clarity that makes your own hesitation feel like a character flaw. He looked at Hale. Hale looked at the tactical screen. 42 minutes to the estimated pre-assault window. Delacroix, Hale said into the handset. I'm sending someone. Civilian contractor cover. I need her inside the eastern gate in 30 minutes. No announcement on any channel. No camera flagging. She walks in like she belongs there. Delacroix's response was immediate. Understood. I'll have credentials waiting at the gate. Hale put down the handset. He looked at Carter. You have 30 minutes to get there, he said. Carter picked up her rifle case. I need 22, she said. Boshahag. Cross walked her to the vehicle. He didn't have a reason to. He had other things to do. But he walked her to the vehicle anyway, and neither of them questioned it. At the door, he stopped. She turned to look at him. There was something he wanted to say. He'd been building toward it for the last several hours without fully acknowledging it. Not an apology, she'd already told him she didn't want one. Something different. Something that was trying to be honest about the specific way this day had changed him. He said, "When you come back." She waited. "I want to understand how you heard that second cell in the recordings," he said. "Not for tactical use. I want to understand how you learned to hear it." Carter studied him for a moment. Then she said, "It took me 4 years to stop listening to what people said and start listening to what they were trying not to say." Cross nodded slowly. 4 years, he said. "And a lot of mistakes," she said. She got in the vehicle. Cross stood there after the vehicle pulled away and stared at the road it had taken and thought about 4 years and a lot of mistakes and whether he had the patience to build something that slow and whether the fact that he was asking the question meant the answer was yes. Hog. The Eastern Maintenance Gate. Carter showed the credentials Delacroix had arranged. The guard on the gate had been told exactly 2 things. A contractor was arriving, and he should not log the arrival on the command net. He did his job and let her through and didn't ask questions because he was professional enough to understand that some things worked better when they moved without footprints. The facility was in controlled lockdown. From the inside, it looked like a normal late-night operational cycle, reduced personnel standard lighting routine movement patterns. Exactly what Delacroix had maintained at Carter's instruction. Carter moved through the eastern corridor. She knew the layout from Delacroix's verbal description. She had converted it in her head to a spatial map during the call and refined it during the drive over. She didn't have the luxury of uncertainty about left turns and right turns. In a situation like this one, hesitation was sound, and sound was information you didn't want to give away. She moved without sound. She had learned to move without sound the way other people learn to type through repetition, until the mechanics dropped below the level of conscious attention and the mind was free to do other things. What her mind was doing was reading the corridor. Not visually, attentionally. The way a hunter reads a trail, not just for what's there, but for what the arrangement of what's there tells you about what came before. The air pressure in the corridor was slightly different than it should have been. A door had been opened recently. Not long ago. The air hadn't equalized yet. She slowed. North Maintenance Corridor. Camera 3 had placed him 45 minutes ago. He wouldn't have moved significantly. Everything about his operational profile said patience, discipline, stillness. But 45 minutes was 45 minutes. She counted doors. The third door on the left had a different quality than the others. She couldn't have explained it in language that would hold up to scientific scrutiny. It was the sum of 1,000 micro-signals processed below the threshold of conscious thought. The dust displacement at the base. The particular way the door sat in its frame. Someone had opened that door recently and not fully closed it. Carter stopped. She stood in the corridor. She thought about the man behind that door, not as a target, as a problem. He was disciplined, patient, experienced enough to have designed 2 simultaneous layered operations. He had spent 6 weeks rehearsing in this facility. He knew the camera positions. He knew the guard rotations. He knew exactly how much time he had and exactly what he needed to do. He was by any professional measure extremely good at this. The question was what he didn't know. He didn't know the valley contact had been analyzed. He didn't know the convoy flag had been identified and corrected. He didn't know his communication signature had been read from 12 kilometers away by someone listening to 3 weeks of radio recordings in an outpost operations room. He didn't know she was standing outside this door. Carter reached for the handle. She opened the door. The man inside moved fast, trained fast. He had been sitting in controlled stillness for over an hour, and he came out of it instantly, the way a person does when stillness is a skill rather than a state. He was already turning when she spoke. She spoke first because the first sound in a room controls the room. "Don't," she said. Just that. One word. In a tone that had no anger in it, and no fear in it, and precisely enough certainty to reach the part of a trained person's brain that runs calculations faster than language. He stopped. He was assessing her the way she was assessing him. She could see it in his eyes, running the calculation. Who was she? How did she know he was here? What did she have and what didn't she have, and what were the vectors? "The operation is over," she said, still quiet, still direct. "Hotel 4 security has your image from camera 3. The second cell's communication pattern has been logged and traced. The planner running both phases knows his structure was read." She watched his face. He was good. His face gave almost nothing. Almost. The micro-expression lasted less than a third of a second. But it was there. The specific involuntary compression around the eyes that happens when the brain processes information it was not prepared to receive. He hadn't known the planner's structure had been read. He had believed the false flag worked. "How?" he said. It wasn't a stall. It was a genuine question from someone whose entire professional framework had just encountered something it couldn't explain. "Someone listened," Carter said. He stared at her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then his hands came away from his body and went to a neutral position. The calculation had completed. The vectors didn't work. Carter stepped aside. Two of Delacroix's security team, who had been positioned at the corridor entrance the moment Carter entered, moving silently on Delacroix's direct instruction through a channel the operative couldn't monitor, came through the door. The operative went with them without resistance. Carter stood in the empty room afterward. She looked at the relay hardware on the far wall, still intact, still running. 12 special operations units still connected, still coordinated, still alive. She thought about the planner. Somewhere out there, a man who was very good at designing invisible wars had just run his design against something he hadn't accounted for. Someone who listened. Carter picked up her rifle case. She walked back toward the eastern gate. She had work to do. She always had work to do. She was back at the outpost by 0240. Cross was standing outside when the vehicle pulled in. He had told himself he was doing a perimeter check. He had been standing in the same spot for 11 minutes. Carter stepped out, rifle case in her left hand, same as always. Cross looked at her face. "It's done," she said. He exhaled through his nose. One slow, controlled breath that carried 12 hours of tension out with it. "The operative, Delacroix's team has him," Carter said. "Relay hardware is intact. 12 units are still connected." Cross nodded. He wanted to say something that matched the weight of what she had just done. He was a man who had spent 12 years in situations that required him to find words in hard moments, and he stood there in the dark outside a desert outpost and could not find a single one that was adequate. So, he said the only thing that was true. "I'm glad you're back," he said. Carter looked at him, not with surprise, with the particular attention of someone who recognizes sincerity and doesn't quite know what to do with it at 0240 after the night they've just had. "So am I," she said. She walked inside. Cross stood there for another moment before following. The night wasn't over. He knew that. She knew that. The operative in Delacroix's custody was a thread, not an ending. The planner was still out there. The structure that had designed 2 simultaneous attacks on a single operational theater was still intact. They had won the night. They had not won the problem. And Carter was already thinking about the problem. "What?" Hale was on the secure line with Brentwood when she walked back in. The call had apparently been going for a while. Hale's posture had the particular quality of a man who had been giving a senior officer a detailed account of events that the senior officer found increasingly difficult to categorize. He saw Carter come in and held up one hand. "Wait," then said into the handset, "She's back. Yes, sir. Yes, intact." A pause. "I'll ask her." He put his hand over the receiver. "Brentwood wants to know if you have enough from the operative to identify the planner." Carter set her rifle case against the wall. "Not yet," she said. "But the operative knows the planner's structure. He was inside it." You don't run a rehearsal phase inside a target facility for 6 weeks without knowing more than you're supposed to. Hale relayed that, listened. He wants a full debrief starting at 0600, Hale said. You meet Delacroix and whoever Brentwood decides to send from the Intelligence Directorate. Tell him I need access to the operative before 0600, Carter said. 2 hours with him before anyone else is in the room. Hale looked at her. You want to talk to him before the formal debrief. I want to talk to him before he's had time to build a story, Carter said. Right now, he's still processing what happened. His framework is disrupted. The longer we wait, the more time his training gives him to reconstruct a version of events he can defend. Hale relayed that too. A longer pause this time. Then Hale said, Brentwood says fine, but he wants someone from his staff in the room. No, Carter said. Hale blinked. Carter, someone from his staff in the room is another person for the operative to assess, Carter said. Another presence to measure, another variable to factor into his decision about what to say. I need him with as few variables as possible. Brentwood won't. Tell him the 2 hours are worth more to him than having a witness in the room, Carter said. Tell him I'll give him a complete transcript of everything said. Hale stared at her for a moment. Then he set it into the handset. The pause on the other end was long enough that Briggs across the room looked up from what he was doing. Then Brentwood said something. Hale almost smiled. He put down the handset. He said, and I am quoting directly, "Tell Ghost 7 that this is the 3rd time tonight I've agreed to something I wasn't going to agree to, and I expect results." Carter picked up her tactical bag. He'll get them, she said. The drive to Hotel 4 the second time was quieter. Cross drove. Nobody had suggested he drive. He had simply gotten in the driver's seat when Carter headed for the vehicle, and Carter had gotten in the passenger side, and that was the arrangement. They drove for several minutes without speaking. Then Cross said, "What are you going to ask him?" "I'm going to let him talk," Carter said. "That's not the same as asking." "No," she said. "It's better." Cross glanced at her. Most interrogators go in with a list of questions, Carter said. A structure, a sequence. They're trying to get to specific information so they move toward it. And you don't. Information you move toward is information the subject can see you moving toward, Carter said. He knows what you want. He can manage what you get. But if you sit down and say nothing, if you just create space, most people will fill it. Even trained operatives. Especially trained operatives, Carter said, because their training tells them that silence is a tactic, so they respond to it as a tactic. They try to counter it, and in trying to counter it, they reveal the shape of what they're protecting. Cross was quiet for a moment. "The thing you said earlier," he said, "about learning to listen for what people are trying not to say. Yes, that's what you're doing. That's what I'm always doing," Carter said. Cross kept his eyes on the road. He was thinking about 12 years of conversations he had conducted in the field and out of it, and how many of them he had walked into with a list and walked out of with only what was on the list. "I've been doing this wrong," he said. "You've been doing it the way you were taught," Carter said. "That's not the same thing." Cross said nothing. Carter looked out the window at the dark. "The way you were taught works," she said. "It's effective. It produces results. I'm not telling you it doesn't. But there's a layer underneath the layer you've been trained to access," she said. "And that layer is where the real information lives." She turned to look at him. "It took me 4 years," she said. "I'm not saying you have to start from the beginning, but I am saying it's there, and now you know it's there, and that's not nothing." Cross nodded slowly. They drove the rest of the way without talking. It wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had arrived somewhere they hadn't expected to arrive when the day started, and were each trying to understand what that meant. The room where Delacroix had placed the operative was functional and blank. The operative was seated. His hands were restrained standard protocol, but the restraints were not punitive. He was alert. He had been alert for every minute since Carter had come through that door, and she knew he had been using every one of those minutes to rebuild a framework around what had happened. She had counted on that. She sat down across from him. She set nothing on the table between them. No recorder, though the room was recording through other means that both of them understood were present. No notes, no documentation, nothing that suggested agenda. She looked at him. He looked back. He was somewhere between 40 and 50. The kind of face that had been in difficult places long enough to become unreadable by design. Dark eyes that assessed and processed and gave nothing back. He spoke first. Which is what she had expected. "You know who he is," the operative said. "Don't you?" Not a question. Carter said nothing. The operative's jaw moved slightly. Not nervousness. Recalibration. "You've been inside the recordings long enough to hear his signature," the operative said. "That's the only way you found the second cell. And if you found the second cell from the recordings, you've been listening to everything for long enough to know it isn't just this operation." Carter kept her face completely still, but something in her registered what he had just said. It isn't just this operation. She had known that. But she hadn't known how much she knew it until he confirmed it by assuming she already did. The operative had just told her without meaning to that the planner's scope was larger than 2 simultaneous operations in one province. She let the silence run. The operative looked at her hands, looked at her face, looked at the space between them. "You're not going to ask me anything," he said. "No," Carter said. He sat back slightly. "That's unusual," he said. "I know," she said. Another silence. The operative was intelligent. She had already understood that. What she was mapping now was not his intelligence, but his relationship to what had happened, specifically the particular texture of how a person relates to something they believed in that has just stopped working. "He told us it was impenetrable," the operative said. Carter waited. The structure, the layering. He spent 8 months building the access into this facility. He told us. The operative stopped, started again. He said the design had never failed. "Until tonight," Carter said. The operative looked at her. "Until you," he said. Carter said nothing. "How?" he said. There it was. The same question he'd asked in the corridor. The same genuine, structurally destabilized need to understand something that his entire professional framework couldn't account for. "I listened to 3 weeks of recordings," Carter said. The operative stared at her. "That's it," he said. "That's it," she said. He was quiet for a long time. "He's going to know by morning," the operative said finally. "That the second phase failed, that I'm in custody. He tracks everything." "I know," Carter said. "He'll move," the operative said. "He always moves after a failed phase. Different location, different personnel. It's built into the protocol. He doesn't stay where he can be mapped." "I know that too," Carter said. "Then you know he's already gone," the operative said. Carter looked at him. "Where does he go?" she said. The operative was quiet. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to answer. The quiet of someone doing a different kind of calculation. Not tactical, personal. Carter watched his face and understood what was happening. The operative had believed in the planner. Not just professionally. The way people believe in architects, in the specific elevated authority of someone who can see the whole structure when everyone else sees only their own corner of it. The failure of the plan wasn't just a tactical setback. It was the collapse of something the operative had organized significant portions of his professional identity around. That kind of collapse created a specific vulnerability, not disloyalty. Something more complicated. The specific disorientation of someone whose loyalty no longer has a reliable object. Carter waited. "Northeastern corridor," the operative said quietly. "There's a network of safe houses. He uses them in sequence, never repeating. But there's a pattern in the sequence." He paused. "There's always a pattern." Carter said, "Show me." What came out of the next 90 minutes would later require 16 pages of classified documentation to fully describe. Carter didn't take notes while the operative talked. She listened. She asked 3 questions in 90 minutes, not to redirect him, but to clarify specific geographic references where ambiguity would create downstream analytical problems. The operative talked about the planner, about the network, about operations Carter had not known existed, and that confirmed in accumulating and devastating detail that what had happened in this valley over the past 24 hours was not an isolated engagement. It was one visible node in a structure that had been functioning invisibly across the region for the better part of 2 years. 12 operations, 12 engagements designed with the same layered patient surveillance-driven methodology. Most had succeeded. The ones that failed had failed for operational reasons, weather timing, logistical collapse, not because anyone had read the structure. Nobody had read the structure. Until tonight. When the operative finished, Carter sat with what she'd heard for a moment. Then she said, "The pattern in the safe house sequence. Describe it to me." The operative described it. Carter closed her eyes. She built the map in her head. The sequence. The logic underneath the sequence. The specific way a methodical planner chose locations not randomly, not simply, but according to a logic that expressed something about how that planner thought. She found the logic in approximately 4 minutes. She opened her eyes. "He's going north," she said. The operative looked at her. "The sequence moves away from recent operations," Carter said. "He's built the safe house network so that each move maximizes distance from the last known failure point while minimizing exposure to surveillance corridors he's already mapped. Northern route gives him both." She looked at the operative. "Where in the north?" The operative told her. Cross was outside the room when Carter came out. He had been waiting for the 90 minutes without being asked to wait. Delacroix had offered him coffee and a chair in her office, and he had taken the coffee and declined the chair, and he had stood in the corridor with his coffee going cold in his hands. When Carter came through the door, he read her face immediately. Something was there that hadn't been there when she went in. Not shock. Carter's baseline was too controlled for shock. But something in the quality of her stillness had changed. It was denser, like a person carrying more weight than they'd walked in with. "What did he give you?" Cross said. 12 operations, Carter said. 2 years, 1 planner. Cross stared at her. "He's been running this for 2 years, she said. "Regional scale, multiple provinces. The methodology is the same across all of them. The same signature I heard in the recordings." Cross was very still. 12 operations, he said. "That we know about," Carter said. Cross looked at the floor for a moment. He thought about the unit Delacroix had mentioned, the one that hadn't had someone catch it in time. He thought about that in the context of 12 operations in 2 years, and realized with a cold, specific clarity that the one that didn't catch it in time was probably not a singular event. "The planner is moving north," Carter said. "I need to get Brentwood on the line. Now. Not at 0600. Now." Cross already had his radio out. The call to Brentwood lasted 4 minutes. Carter talked for 3 of them. Brentwood was silent for most of those 3 minutes, in the way that a very senior officer is silent when they are rapidly recontextualizing everything they thought they understood about an operational theater. When Carter stopped, Brentwood said, "Are you confident in the northern route?" "Yes," Carter said, "based on the safe house sequence logic." "Yes. And the planner doesn't know you've identified the sequence." "He knows the second phase failed," Carter said. "He doesn't know how. He'll assume the operative was captured and will assume standard interrogation protocols, structured questions, specific targets. He won't assume someone mapped the logic of his safe house selection." "Because nobody's ever done that before," Brentwood said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Carter said. A silence. Then Brentwood said, "I'm authorizing a northern intercept. I need your analysis packaged and transmitted to my office in the next 20 minutes so I can get the right assets moving. Understood, Carter said. Ghost 7. Sir? The operative. He gave you this voluntarily. Carter thought about the 90 minutes. About the operative's face when he talked about the planner. About the specific quality of disillusionment that had driven him to describe a safe house sequence he'd been trained never to reveal. He gave it to me because he needed someone to understand what he'd been part of, Carter said. And I gave him that. Brentwood was quiet for a moment. That's a skill they don't teach, he said. No, sir, Carter said. They don't. The line went dead. Cross drove her back to the outpost while she packaged the analysis. She worked on a secured tablet, converting 90 minutes of listened material into a coherent geographic and operational summary. She didn't type slowly. She didn't pause to think about what to include. The material was organized in her head with the same precision she brought to everything, and the only limitation on speed was the keyboard. Cross watched the road and said nothing. When she finished, she transmitted the package to Brentwood's office and put the tablet down. The sky outside was beginning to differentiate itself from the ground. Not light yet. The specific pre-light that happens in desert environments when the darkness begins to dilute before the sun has any claim on the horizon. Can I ask you something? Carter said. Cross looked at her briefly, then back at the road. You've been asking me things since we left, he said. A different kind, she said. He waited. The operative, she said. When I came out of that room, you were still there. Yes, Cross said. You waited 90 minutes in a corridor. Yes. Why? Cross was quiet for a moment. Because you went in alone, he said. And someone should know you came out. Carter looked at him. She didn't say anything. Cross kept his eyes on the road. That sounds simple, he said. I know it sounds simple, but that's what it was. Carter looked forward. The pre-light was shifting. Somewhere behind the horizon, the sun was organizing itself. The desert was moving from black to a deep, dense blue that had the particular quality of something enormous holding its breath. It doesn't sound simple, Carter said. It sounds like exactly what it is. Cross nodded once. They drove without speaking after that, but it was the easiest silence of the entire night. Hale was awake when they got back. He had been awake for the entire night, which meant he'd been awake for going on 26 hours, and the only visible evidence of that was a very slight slowing in the movement of his eyes, the specific economy of motion that a person adopts when they're running on discipline instead of energy. He looked at Carter. Brentwood called, Hale said. 2 minutes ago. Assets are moving north. He said to tell you the intercept window is approximately 6 hours. Carter nodded. And he said something else, Hale said. He paused, like he was deciding how to deliver it. He said in 30 years of operational intelligence, he has never had a civilian. His word transmit an analysis package of that quality in 20 minutes based on a 90-minute conversation conducted without notes at 0300 in the morning. Cross behind Carter said nothing. Carter said nothing. He also said, Hale continued, and again, I'm quoting directly, find out who trained her and get me a meeting. Briggs across the room let out a short sound that might have been a laugh. Cross looked at Carter. Carter's expression remained neutral. But Cross had spent enough hours now reading that face to catch the very small thing that happened in her eyes. Not pride. Something quieter than pride. The specific contained satisfaction of a person who has done a thing they believed in and had it confirmed not by praise, but by result. What did you tell him? Carter asked Hale. Hale looked at her steadily. I told him I'd pass it along, Hale said. And I told him that in my professional assessment what she has can't be transferred by finding her trainer. He paused. I told him you built it yourself. The room was quiet. Cross watched Carter absorb that. She absorbed it the same way she absorbed everything without performance, without deflection, with the direct and slightly uncomfortable willingness to let something real land without immediately doing something to manage it. "Thank you," she said. Hale nodded. It was not a large moment in terms of its visible components. Two people in a desert outpost at 04:15 after the longest night either of them had spent in recent memory. 3 words. But Cross had learned tonight that the size of a moment and the weight of a moment were not the same measurement. He had learned a lot of things tonight about the difference between what looked significant and what was. D. The debrief with Brentwood's team happened at 0600 as scheduled. 3 analysts arrived via helicopter 40 minutes early, which Cross noted meant they'd been on a helicopter somewhere between here and Brentwood's location since well before the call. Brentwood had anticipated the outcome of the interrogation before Carter had even gone in. That, Cross thought, was what it looked like when a very senior person bet on the right person. The debrief lasted 3 hours. Carter led it. Not because anyone formally assigned her to lead it, because she had the information, and the 3 analysts understood immediately that their function in this room was to receive what she gave them, not to extract it. Cross sat in for the first hour. He listened to Carter present 12 operations, 2 years, 1 planner, and a geographic and behavioral analysis of a network that multiple intelligence agencies had been tracking for 18 months without ever seeing its underlying structure in the same clear, direct, non-performative voice she used for everything. He left after the first hour because he had a unit to run and men to check on, and 100 logistical tasks that the night had generated and that nobody was going to handle if he sat in a debrief. But before he left, he sat for a moment in the corridor outside the operations room. He thought about the helicopter landing. 22 hours ago. The rifle case. The silence. His own voice saying words he hadn't thought through. That's who they sent us. He thought about 8 rounds and a dismantled battlefield strategy and a 90-minute conversation that unraveled 2 years of invisible war. He thought about a woman standing in a dark corridor outside a door, making a calculation about cost that didn't include her own fear as a relevant variable. He thought about what it had taken to build that. Not training. Training was a component, but it wasn't the architecture. The architecture was something else. Something that came from a different kind of sustained attention over a very long time. He thought about 4 years. He thought about a lot of mistakes. He stood up. He had work to do. Outside the desert was fully light now. Not the blue pre-light of 0400, but the full, hard, honest light of a morning that had arrived regardless of what the night had cost. Cross walked out into it. He didn't look back at the operations room. He didn't need to. He knew what was in there. A woman who had come in carrying a rifle case and a reputation nobody knew about and had spent 22 hours doing the thing she was built to do and was now doing the next thing with the same absence of drama that she brought to all of it. Cross had spent 12 years learning what dangerous looked like. He was just now understanding that he'd been looking for it in the wrong places. The 3 analysts left at 0930. They walked out carrying everything Carter had given them in 3 hours. And the lead analyst, a woman named Forsyth, who had spent 15 years in signals intelligence and had the particular quality of someone who did not impress easily, paused at the door and looked back at Carter. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I've been in this work for a long time." Carter waited. "We've had the signal patterns from that network in our database for 18 months, Forsyth said. 11 analysts have looked at those patterns. None of them heard what you heard." Carter said nothing. "I'm not asking you to explain it again," Forsyth said. "I understood your methodology. I'm just telling you as one professional to another that what you did last night is not something I can put a category around." Carter looked at her. "Put it in the category of someone who had enough time with the recordings," Carter said. Forsyth almost smiled. "If that's what it takes," she said, "then we've been giving people the wrong amount of time." She walked out. Hale closed the door behind her. He turned to Carter, who was already at the communications terminal pulling up the latest feed from the Northern Intercept operation. "She's right, you know," Hale said. "She's right about what her analysts had access to," Carter said. She's not right that it's inexplicable. Hale leaned against the wall. You're going to tell me it's just pattern recognition? It is just pattern recognition, Carter said, built over a very long time through a very specific kind of attention. Then why doesn't everyone do it? Carter looked at him. Because it requires you to be wrong a lot, she said. And most people decide fairly early that being wrong feels worse than having an incomplete picture. Hale absorbed that. He looked at the terminal. What's happening on the northern route? The intercept team is in position, Carter said. They're about 40 minutes from the first safe house in the sequence. And you think he's there? I think he's somewhere in that corridor, Carter said. The sequence narrows it to 3 locations. He'll be at one of them. 40-minute window, Hale said. Yes. And if the sequence logic is wrong, Carter looked at the screen. Then we find him a different way, she said. But the sequence logic isn't wrong. Hale studied her face. 27 hours in, and she still said things like that without a trace of the particular bravado that most people use to cover uncertainty. It wasn't arrogance. Arrogance had a performance quality to it, a need for the audience to register the confidence. This was something else entirely. This was a person who had been right enough times in high enough stakes situations to have developed a simple and functional relationship with her own judgment. She trusted it because she had tested it, repeatedly, expensively, in places where being wrong had real consequences. That was a different thing from certainty. But it looked like certainty from the outside, and Hale had spent most of the last 24 hours learning to tell the difference. Cross came back inside at 10:15. He had been with his unit for 3 hours, checking men. Running through the post-contact logistics that yesterday's engagement had generated equipment assessment casualty documentation, resupply, coordination after action preliminary notes. The 100 unglamorous tasks that followed a battle and reminded you that war was mostly administration interrupted by violence. He looked like a man who had been awake for 28 hours and was running on the specific fuel that a mission-complete state generates, not energy exactly, but the absence of the adrenaline expenditure that had been sustaining him. He found Carter at the terminal. He found Hale next to her. He found both of them watching a screen that was showing an overhead drone feed of a mountainous corridor approximately 40 kilometers north. He came and stood behind them. "They're moving," Hale said without turning around. Cross watched the screen. Small heat signatures. The intercept team moving along a route that the drone was tracking in real time. He counted them. 8 personnel, spread correctly, moving with the particular discipline of people who had been given a time-sensitive target and a narrow window. "How far out?" Cross asked. 22 minutes, Carter said. "Still 3 possible locations." 2, Carter said. The team checked the first one on their approach route. Cleared. Cross looked at the screen. 2 locations. 22 minutes. "Which one?" he said. Carter pointed to a spot on the screen. "That one," she said. Cross looked at it. "Why that one over the other?" "The other location requires a route that passes 2 surveillance points he's already mapped," Carter said. "If he's moving after a failed phase, he's moving conservatively. He takes the route with fewer exposures, even if it's longer." Cross stared at the screen. Then he said, "You know how he thinks." Carter didn't answer immediately. "I know how the structure thinks," she said. "The structure is more consistent than the person. People have moods, impulses, bad days. But the principles underneath their decisions, those stay." She looked at the screen. "He built his whole network on one core principle," she said. "Minimize exposure at every step. That principle is so deep in how he operates that he doesn't even think about it anymore. It's automatic." "And that's how you find him," Cross said. "That's how the sequence finds him," Carter said. "I just read the sequence." 17 minutes later, the intercept team reached the second location. The room was completely still. Hale was on a direct channel with the team leader, a captain named Yardley, who had been in special operations for 9 years and whose voice on the radio carried the flat, compressed quality of a person approaching a high-risk entry. "We have the structure in sight," Yardley said. "No visible external activity. Thermal imaging shows 2 signatures inside. 1 stationary, 1 moving." Hale looked at Carter. "2 signatures," he said. "The moving one is the planner," Carter said. "How do you know which—" "The stationary one is security," Carter said. "Placed at the entry point. The planner never places himself at the entry. He puts himself in the interior with multiple exit options." She had said it without hesitation. Cross watched Hale make the decision. It was visible in the way his jaw set. The specific commitment of a commander who is choosing to trust information he cannot independently verify in a situation where being wrong means walking his team into a compromised entry. "Yardley," Hale said into the radio. "Primary target is the interior signature, security element at the entry point. Adjust your stack accordingly." A pause. "Copy," Yardley said. "Adjusting. On your mark." Hale looked at Carter. Carter looked at the screen. "Mark," Hale said. The heat signatures on the drone feed moved. 8 personnel collapsing on a single structure with the coordinated speed of people who had trained for this specific kind of entry until it was faster than thought. The exterior signature moved reacting, and the intercept team's response was immediate. Clean. The exterior element was neutralized before it could communicate. Inside, the second signature moved toward the rear of the structure exactly as Carter had said. The team was already there. Yardley's voice came over the radio 11 seconds after they entered. "Target in custody," he said. "Uninjured. Compliant." The room exhaled, all of it at once. Hale, Cross, Briggs in the corner. The 2 junior officers who had been hovering near the terminal for the last 20 minutes. Carter did not exhale. She was already pulling up the next layer of data. Cross noticed that. He filed it away. The way a person who had just solved the central problem of a 30-hour operational period immediately moved to the next problem was not a small thing to observe. It told you something fundamental about how they experienced their own work, not as a series of wins to be registered and savored, but as a continuous problem that changed shape but never actually stopped. He wondered if that was something you could learn. He suspected it was something you could only choose. Brentwood called 6 minutes after Yardley's transmission. He had apparently been monitoring the drone feed from his location and had heard the radio traffic in real time. "I owe you an apology," Brentwood said. He was talking to Carter, and he said it without preamble, which told Cross that the colonel had been thinking about how to say it for at least the last few minutes, and had decided that the only way was directly. Carter was quiet for a moment. "For which part?" she said. A brief silence on Brentwood's end. "When you called me at midnight and told me the convoy analysis was wrong," Brentwood said. "I said you'd told me you were confident." "I remember," Carter said. "That was a rebuke," Brentwood said. "Not a question. I was telling you that you'd used the word confident, and then changed your assessment, and I was using that to suggest your judgment was unreliable." "I know what you were doing," Carter said. "And I was wrong to do it," Brentwood said. "You corrected an error before it caused harm. That's not a failure of judgment. That's what good judgment looks like." Carter didn't say anything for a moment. Cross, standing close enough to hear both sides of the call, watched her face. There was something happening there that he recognized from earlier in the night. The specific quality of someone receiving something real and letting it land rather than deflecting it or immediately managing it into something smaller. "Thank you," she said. "There's something else," Brentwood said. Carter waited. "The planner," Brentwood said. "We have preliminary identification from the team. The name that's coming back matches an individual who has been on the regional watch list for 26 months. A pause. 3 separate intelligence task forces have been hunting him for the better part of 2 years. None of them found him. Carter said nothing. "You found him," Brentwood said. "In 30 hours, with radio recordings and a conversation." "The recordings did most of it," Carter said. "Ghost 7. Brentwood's voice had changed. The formal register was still there, but underneath it was something more direct. Something that had more to do with one person talking to another than a colonel addressing a lieutenant. I've been in this work for 30 years. I have never not once seen what I watched happen last night. Carter looked at the terminal screen. The drone feed was still running. The intercept team was withdrawing from the structure, the planner in custody between two personnel. It wasn't one thing, Carter said. It was a sequence. The Valley contact gave me the signature. The recordings gave me the structure. The structure gave me the cells. The cells gave me the planner's logic. The logic gave me the safe house sequence. You're describing a chain, Brentwood said. Every answer is a chain, Carter said. Most people stop pulling when they find the first link. A pause. I want to talk to you about what comes next, Brentwood said. Not operationally, professionally. What you built, the methodology, the analytical framework. I want to understand how we make it available to more people. Carter was quiet. That's a longer conversation, she said. I know, Brentwood said. I'll call you in 48 hours. Get some sleep before then. The line went dead. Hale looked at Carter. Carter looked at the screen. 48 hours, Hale said. I heard him, Carter said. Are you going to sleep? Carter looked at him. After one more thing, she said. The one more thing took 4 hours. Cross found out later what it was, though Carter didn't announce it or ask for permission or tell anyone she was doing it. She went to the men. Not formally, not as a debrief or a presentation. She moved through the outpost the way she moved through everything, without ceremony, without production, and found the soldiers who had been part of the previous day's contact and talked to them. Not about the operation, about what they'd seen. She asked them questions. The way she always asked questions, not to extract specific information, but to create space and then to listen carefully to what filled it. She talked to Kellner, who had made the joke when she stepped off the helicopter and who had not said a word to her since, and she sat next to him on a crate outside the motor pool and asked him what the hardest moment of the previous day had been for him personally. Not tactically, personally, Kellner told her. It wasn't the firefight. It was the 4 hours before she arrived, when the unit was pinned and the wounded were stable but not improving, and the communications relay was down, and nobody had said out loud yet that reinforcements might not come in time, but everyone was doing the math privately and coming up with the same number. That 4 hours. That specific grinding, isolated kind of fear that comes not from immediate danger, but from the growing suspicion that the situation has exceeded the reach of everything you know how to do. Carter listened. Then she said, "That feeling you're describing, that's not weakness." Kellner looked at her. That's what it feels like when a situation has been specifically designed to produce that feeling, Carter said. The enemy didn't attack you randomly. They built a containment strategy around the specific psychological threshold of your unit. What you felt was a response to a designed stimulus. It was the correct response. Kellner stared at her. The correct response, he said. You felt exactly what they needed you to feel to stay pinned, Carter said, which means you were responding accurately to what was happening. The problem wasn't your response. The problem was the design. She looked at him directly. When you understand the design, the response changes, she said. That's what I came here to do. Not to be braver than you, to change the design. Kellner was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, when I said what I said, when you stepped off the helicopter. I know what you said, Carter said. I was scared, he said. I thought I needed it to be someone who looked like what I thought a rescue looked like. Carter looked at him. And what does it look like now, she said. Kellner thought about it. Someone who sees what I can't see, he said, and then changes it. Carter stood up. That's closer, she said. She walked away. Kellner sat on the crate and stared at the ground and thought about the difference between the image of a thing and the function of a thing, and how much of his life he had spent confusing the two. Cross found her 2 hours after that sitting outside on the northern side of the outpost. He didn't ask how he knew she'd be there. He just knew. The same way he'd known to stand outside the vehicle when she landed, and to wait in the corridor, and to drive without being asked. Something in the past 30 hours had recalibrated his instincts toward her in a way he didn't fully have language for yet. He sat down next to her, not close. The appropriate distance of two people who had been through something together and were now sitting on the other side of it, trying to understand what it had changed. Brentwood's call, Cross said. The professional conversation, the methodology. Yes, Carter said. Are you going to do it? Carter looked at the horizon. Try to transfer it, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that, she said. Most of what I do, the specific pattern recognition, the listening structure, it took me years to build. You can't compress that into a training program. But, Cross said, but the principles underneath it aren't mine, Carter said. I didn't invent them. I assembled them from things other people had already understood and just hadn't connected. She paused. The principle that silence contains more information than speech. The principle that what someone protects reveals more than what they say. The principle that patterns persist even when the surface changes. She looked at Cross. Those can be taught, she said. Not as techniques, as ways of paying attention. Cross nodded. 4 years, he said. 4 years, she said. But I was starting from nothing and making a lot of avoidable mistakes. With the right framework, with someone pointing at the right things at the right time. She paused. Less time. Maybe significantly less. Cross was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to be part of building it. Carter looked at him. He held her gaze. I'm not asking to be in your program or attached to your operation, he said. I'm saying that what I watched you do last night changed something in how I understand this work. And I don't want to let that change sit in me without doing something with it. Carter studied him for a long moment. You know what changed, she said. I have a working hypothesis, he said. Tell me. Cross thought carefully. I've spent 12 years making decisions based on what I could see, he said. And I was good at that. I'm genuinely good at reading visible situations. But last night I watched someone who doesn't work with what she can see. She works with what the visible things are pointing at. He paused. The invisible version underneath. Carter held his gaze. The invisible version underneath, she said quietly. Is that close? He said. That's very close, she said. A pause. The gap between what's visible and what it points at, Carter said. That's the whole job. Everything I do lives in that gap. She looked forward again. Most people don't even know the gap exists. You now know it exists. That's not a small thing, Cross. It feels small, he said, compared to what you can do with it. Everything feels small at the beginning, Carter said. That's just what the beginning feels like. Cross absorbed that. The sun was moving toward its high point. The desert in full light looked nothing like the desert in the pre-light of 0400. Everything was clear and direct and unambiguous. Cross thought that was a useful way to think about what the last 30 hours had done. Not dramatic revelation, not sudden transformation. Just light arriving and making visible things that had always been there. Can I ask you something? Cross said. You've been asking me things for the last 30 hours, Carter said. This one is different, he said. She waited. What made you choose this? Cross said. The listening, the patterns, the invisible version underneath. You could have gone a different direction. Tactical, operational. The things your file suggests you're capable of. Why this specific path? Carter was quiet for longer than usual. When she answered, her voice had a quality that he hadn't heard before. Not less controlled, but operating from a different place. Somewhere below the professional layer. I was on a mission 4 years ago, she said. Small team, high-value target, good intelligence, solid planning, experienced personnel. She paused. We walked into something nobody had read correctly. The target knew we were coming, had known for 3 days. Cross said nothing. We lost 2 people, Carter said. People who should not have been lost. Not because we failed tactically, because we failed to see the shape of the situation before we entered it. She looked at her hands. After that, she said, I had a very simple question. Not how do we fight better, how do we see better? Before the fight, before the entry, before the 4-minute timing sequence, and the controlled attrition, and the moment when the situation has already exceeded your reach. She looked up. How do we see the whole thing before it starts? Cross sat with that. He thought about the 2 people Carter had just mentioned, and about what it must have been like to carry that particular loss into 4 years of building the answer to it. Not as penance, as purpose. The specific kind of construction that happens when grief finds a direction. Did you find it? He said. The answer? Carter thought about it honestly. I found a way of seeing that's better than what I had, she said. I don't know if it's the answer. I know it saved lives last night that would otherwise have been lost. She paused. That's enough to keep going. Cross nodded. That's enough to keep going, he repeated. Not as an agreement, as something he was keeping for himself. At 1400 hours, Brentwood's office transmitted a preliminary report summary. The planner's identity had been confirmed. The network documentation from Carter's analysis package had matched 3 existing intelligence files that had previously been considered unconnected. 2 regional operations that had been attributed to separate cells were now being reattributed to the same planning structure. The number was no longer 12. It was 17. 17 operations, 2.5 years. One structure that nobody had been able to see until a lieutenant with a rifle case and a set of radio recordings sat in a desert outpost and listened for 18 minutes. Hale read the transmission. Then he read it again. Then he walked to where Carter was sitting and handed her the tablet without saying anything. She read it. She handed it back. 17, Hale said. 17 confirmed, Carter said. The actual number is higher. The methodology was in place before the period covered by the files. He didn't start with this level of sophistication. He developed it. Hale stared at her. You're saying there are more. I'm saying the structure is older than the records show, Carter said. Which means when your analysts go back through the historical data with the signature pattern, they'll find operations that weren't attributed to this network. Hale looked at the tablet. How many more? Carter looked at him. I don't know, she said. But I know how to find them. Hale put the tablet down. He looked at Carter in the way that a man looks at something when the category he's been trying to put it in finally admits it doesn't fit. And instead of frustration at the category, he feels something that is closer to relief that the thing is bigger than he thought. Brentwood's 48-hour call, Hale said. Yes, Carter said. You're going to change things. Carter looked at him directly. I'm going to try, she said. Private Kellner found Cross at the motor pool at 1500. He had been working on equipment documentation for 2 hours, and he looked like someone who had been thinking hard about something while his hands did something mechanical, which was a reliable way to know the thinking was the actual work. Sergeant Cross, Kellner said. Cross looked at him. I want to understand what she did, Kellner said. Lieutenant Carter, the pattern analysis, the listening. I want to understand how it works. Cross looked at him for a moment. Why? Cross said. Kellner thought about it. Because I've been in the Army for 6 months, he said. And I already have a picture of what good looks like, what effective looks like, what dangerous looks like. He paused. And yesterday that picture was completely wrong. Cross studied the young soldier. He thought about 12 years of his own pictures. Yeah, Cross said. It was. So I want to build a better one, Kellner said. And I figured you'd been watching her long enough to know where to start. Cross was quiet for a moment. He thought about the conversation outside the outpost, about the gap between what's visible and what it points at, about the invisible version underneath. You start by being wrong, Cross said. Kellner blinked. By being wrong. By being wrong as many times as it takes until you stop being attached to being right, Cross said. Until being right stops feeling like the goal and starts feeling like a side effect of paying the right kind of attention. Kellner looked at him. How long does that take? Cross almost smiled. She said 4 years, he said. I'm going to say it depends on whether you're willing to sit with being wrong instead of running from it. Kellner was quiet. I made a joke when she stepped off the helicopter, he said. I know, Cross said. I made the same joke 2 seconds before you did. Kellner looked at the ground. So we both start from the same place, Cross said. The place where we were wrong. He looked at Kellner directly. That's not a bad place to start, he said. If you use it right. Carter left at 1700. No ceremony. No formal send-off. The helicopter came, and she walked out to it with her rifle case in her left hand and her tactical bag on her shoulder, the same as she'd arrived. But something was different. And every person in that outpost who had been there for the last 30 hours felt it, even if none of them could have put it into language without some time and distance. Hale shook her hand. He held it a moment longer than a handshake required. The report I'll submit, he said. It's going to be accurate. I know it will, she said. Some people won't believe it. Some people won't believe it, she agreed. Does that bother you? Carter looked at him. What I did is documented, she said. The results are documented. The planner is in custody. 17 operations are being re-examined. 12 units are still connected. She paused. What people believe about how it happened doesn't change any of that. Hale nodded. No, he said. It doesn't. She turned to go. Then Hale said, when they first told me Ghost 7 was coming, I built a picture of what that was going to look like. Carter stopped. I know, she said. The picture was completely wrong, he said. Yes, she said. I'm glad it was, he said. Carter looked at him. Something in her face moved. Not a smile exactly, but the specific quality of expression that a person has when they hear something true, said simply by someone who means it. So am I, she said. She walked to the helicopter. Cross was standing near the perimeter wall. She saw him on her way past. She stopped. 4 years, he said. Give or take, she said. I'll take the give, he said. Carter looked at him for a moment. You already started, she said. Cross looked at her. Last night, she said. When you went back through the contact log in your head while I was talking. When you checked the 4-minute interval independently before you said I was right. She paused. That was you listening for the pattern instead of the content. Cross was still. You noticed that, he said. I notice everything, she said. She walked to the helicopter. The rotors were already running. She got in. The helicopter lifted. Cross watched it go until it was a shape against the sky, then a point, then nothing. Behind him, the outpost was already moving back into its rhythms. The work of a military unit that had been through something significant and was now processing it the way soldiers process everything, by continuing to function, by doing the next task, by converting experience into operational knowledge and then into the habits of practice. Kellner came and stood next to Cross. Both of them watched the empty sky where the helicopter had been. She's gone, Kellner said. She's gone, Cross said. But the thing she showed us, Kellner said. The gap, the invisible version underneath. Yes, Cross said. That stays, Kellner said. Cross looked at the young soldier. At 6 months in, at 20 years old, at the beginning of everything, Kellner had just said the most important thing anyone had said in the last 30 hours. That stays, Cross said. He put a hand briefly on Kellner's shoulder. Then he walked back toward the operations room, because there was work to do and the work mattered, and he now understood more completely than he had 24 hours ago exactly what it was for. Somewhere to the north, a planner who had run invisible wars for 2.5 years was in custody. 17 operations were being dismantled. A network that nobody had been able to see was now visible and named and mapped. And somewhere in the air above the desert, a woman with a rifle case and a way of listening that most people never learned was already thinking about the next problem. Not with doubt, not with hesitation, with the specific, focused, absolute clarity of someone who had found the thing they were built to do and had spent years making themselves worthy of it. Evelyn Carter had arrived in a valley where everyone expected a warrior and seen a different kind of soldier. She had arrived carrying a rifle case and silence, and the kind of attention that most people spent their whole lives too distracted or too afraid to develop. She had listened when everyone else was reacting. She had seen the invisible version underneath when everyone else was responding to the surface. She had walked into the places nobody thought were survivable, and walked out again with the thing that mattered. And she had left behind in a desert outpost that would never appear in any public record. A handful of soldiers who now knew that the picture they had been carrying of what a warrior looked like was not wrong because it was too small. It was wrong because it was looking in only one direction. Real strength does not announce itself with noise. It arrives in the places nobody is watching, reads the thing nobody thought to read, and changes the outcome before anyone understands what happened. That is what Evelyn Carter was. That is what she had always been. And now, finally, the world was beginning to catch up.